Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to try and cut through some of the noise around a really complex situation. We're talking about the recent high-level peace talks concerning Ukraine.
Right.
It all feels like a constantly shifting puzzle, doesn't it? So what exactly happened in Washington? What did these discussions really tell us about the path towards peace? That's what we're here for. We'll dive into the latest sources, pull out the key insights, maybe some surprising facts, and hopefully get you crystal clear on the latest developments and the real dynamics at play.
Absolutely. And understanding the nuances here, the details behind the headlines, it's just crucial. It's really key to grasping the bigger picture, isn't it? International relations, where things might be headed in this very tricky geopolitical moment.
Right, so let's start with the immediate reality on the ground, because it's pretty stark. Picture this. High-level peace talks are underway in Washington. Okay. But at the exact same time, overnight into Tuesday, August 19th, 2025, a major Russian air attack is unfolding. This is a striking contrast. Diplomacy happening here, destruction happening there simultaneously.
Quite the juxtaposition.
Yeah, and Ukraine's report gives you a sense of the scale. They said 270 drones and 10 missiles were launched. Now, the interceptors have suppressed 30 drones and 6 missiles, but still, 40 drones and 4 missiles hit targets across 16 different locations. Debris fell in 3 others.
Wow.
And this wasn't minor. It was actually the largest overnight barrage in weeks, the biggest since July 31st, when they saw like 309 drones and 8 missiles. So a significant uptick.
And on the other side, Russia's defense ministry had its own account. They reported shooting down 23 Ukrainian drones overnight. 13 of those were apparently over the Volgograd region. The regional governor, Andrei Bokarov, mentioned on Telegram that debris caused fires, specifically at an oil refinery and also on a hospital roof. But thankfully, no casualties were reported in those incidents.
So you have this major escalation in attacks happening right alongside, sort of bookending, a day focused on peace talks.
Yeah.
What does that timing even signify? What are we supposed to make of that?
Well, it certainly suggests, doesn't it, that for some parties involved, the battlefield is still the main stage, the primary lever of influence, maybe. Even while these diplomatic channels are technically open, it's more than just a lack of a ceasefire. Having the largest attack in weeks, precisely during peace talks, it could be Russia reinforcing its leverage, signaling that their diplomatic stance is tied directly to what happens on the ground.
Right, putting immense pressure on Ukraine at the table.
Exactly, highlighting how the ongoing fighting directly impacts the negotiations themselves.
That's such a vital piece of context as we shift focus now to the talks themselves. These happened Monday, August 18th, 2025, in Washington. Key players: Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President Donald Trump, and also a delegation of European leaders. And the stated goal, well, it was pretty ambitious. They were there to discuss a potential roadmap to end Russia's full-scale invasion, the one that started back in February 2022.
And it's important to remember, these Washington talks didn't just pop up out of nowhere. They came right after another pretty critical meeting. Just days before, Friday, August 15th, Trump had met with Russian President Vladimir Putin up in Alaska.
Ah, right, the Alaska meeting.
Yes, and Putin apparently came to that meeting with some very clear non-negotiable demands. He flat out refused an immediate ceasefire, and he demanded that Ukraine basically cede the entirety of its eastern Donetsk region. That was his starting position.
Wow, okay. So that really sets the stage. And the atmosphere going into Monday's talks in D.C. was definitely tense. You had Trump posting on social media on Sunday the 17th, basically sounding like he was putting pressure on Zelenskyy. He wrote something like, President Zelenskyy of Ukraine can end the war with Russia almost immediately if he wants to, or he can continue to fight.
Strong words.
Yeah. And he added that Ukraine wouldn't be allowed into NATO and wouldn't get Crimea back. Plus, people remember that report from February about a, quote, fractious Oval Office meeting, where Zelenskyy apparently got lambasted by Trump and Vice President J.D. Vance. So expectations were maybe for more fireworks.
Right, given that history.
But surprisingly, the reports describe Monday's meetings as cordial, which is quite a turnaround, though, predictably, lots of key issues were still unresolved. Still, cordial is interesting, isn't it?
It really is. And while, cordiality might suggest some willingness to engage, the fact that core disagreements remain, well, it points to the huge gap that still exists. But one idea did emerge that seemed to have broad support, at least initially. Trump, Zelenskyy, the Europeans, they all apparently backed the idea of a direct bilateral meeting between Zelenskyy and Putin.
Which is interesting because
Russia had reportedly repeatedly dodged that kind of direct top-level meeting before, so it seemed like a potential step forward.
And Trump sounded pretty positive about it. He said something like, I think it's going to be when, not if. He even posted later on social media saying he'd spoken to Putin and had, quote, began the arrangements for a meeting.
Right, but then you get the Kremlin's response, and this is where the nuance is just critical. Yuri Ushakov, a top aide, didn't quite confirm that. He talked about supporting a continuation of direct negotiations between the Russian and Ukrainian delegations.
Delegations, not necessarily the presidents themselves.
Exactly. And he mentioned an idea being discussed to, quote, increase the level of representatives from both sides in those existing talks. See the difference? It's not a clear yes to a brand new Putin-Zelenskyy summit. It's more like, maybe we elevate the current negotiators. It feels like a careful diplomatic calibration, not a full embrace of Trump's announcement.
That's a really important distinction. Okay, so what about security guarantees for Ukraine? That was another big topic. Trump apparently told Zelenskyy, we're going to be discussing it today, but we will give them very good protection, very good security.
And later, Trump did confirm that Putin would, in principle, accept security guarantees for Ukraine. But, and this is the huge but, Russian officials immediately clarified on Monday that having NATO troops physically present in Ukraine would still be completely unacceptable.
So guarantees, yes. NATO presence, no. That's a fundamental clash right there on what guarantees actually mean on the ground.
Precisely. A major sticking point.
Okay, and this is where it gets really interesting, I think. The whole debate over a ceasefire. Because the positions seemed miles apart. Zelenskyy and the European leaders were very clear. They wanted a full ceasefire first, and only after that could real peace negotiations begin.
Right, that was their sequence. Ceasefire, then talks. But that contrasts pretty sharply with where Trump ended up. Remember, he'd been demanding a ceasefire pretty consistently since January.
Yeah, that was his big thing for a while.
But sources suggest that after meeting Putin in Alaska, he seemed to sort of drop that specific demand. On Monday, he actually told Zelenskyy directly, I don't think you need a ceasefire.
Wait, really? He said that?
Yes. And he explained it by saying he could understand strategically why one country or the other wouldn't want it, acknowledging the military logic, perhaps.
That is a remarkable shift, especially when you pair it with another statement he apparently made, saying he likes the concept of a ceasefire, because you'd stop killing people immediately.
It seems contradictory, doesn't it?
It really does. How do you reconcile those two things? Liking the concept for saving lives, but telling Zelenskyy he doesn't need one. What does this signal for the immediate future?
Well, it tells us, I think, that the word peace itself, or even ceasefire, can hold vastly different meanings for each side. For Kyiv, a ceasefire seems tied to sovereignty, preventing a frozen conflict that locks in Russian gains.
Makes sense.
For Moscow, maybe it's more tactical, a tool to consolidate, regroup, rearm, or maybe just a bargaining chip. And Trump's shifting stance, well, it suggests perhaps a very pragmatic, maybe even transactional approach, weighing strategic advantage, maybe his read of Putin's position, potentially over the immediate goal of stopping the fighting.
A critical tension, absolutely.
It really is, and it's going to define whatever path forward exists if one does.
So after the meetings wrapped up, Zelenskyy, he expressed gratitude to Trump for hosting. He put out a telegram message thanking the White House for what he called the important signal from the USA regarding readiness to support and be part of post-war security guarantees. And he wrote, the leaders personally came to support Ukraine and discuss everything that will bring us closer to real peace, a reliable security architecture that will protect Ukraine and all of Europe.
Sounds hopeful, right?
It does sound hopeful. However, the comments coming from the European leaders afterwards, they hinted more at those unresolved obstacles we talked about,
right,
despite the reported cordiality.
Right, like French President Emmanuel Macron. He said something that captured the shared desire initially. He said, you have an American president, European presidents, and a Ukrainian president all wanting peace. Okay, fair enough.
But then, almost in the next breath, Macron voiced his own deep skepticism. And this provides a really important counterpoint. He said, for my part, I have the greatest doubts about the reality of a desire for peace on the part of the Russian president.
Because as long as he thinks he can win through war, he will do so. That's a pretty blunt assessment. And he elaborated on his view of Putin's objective to take as much territory as possible, to weaken Ukraine, and to have a Ukraine that is not viable alone or is within the Russian fold. That's a very different vision of Russia's endgame compared to, say, just negotiating border disputes.
Well, that's starkly different, yeah. And German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, he also chimed in on the thorny issue, as he called it, of territorial concessions.
Yes, and Mertz used a really powerful analogy to try and frame just how difficult this is. He said, the Russian demand that Kiev give up the free parts of Donbass is, to put it in perspective, equivalent to the U.S. having to give up Florida.
Wow. Florida. Okay, that puts it in perspective.
It really does, doesn't it? And he emphasized, a sovereign state cannot simply decide something like that. It is a decision that Ukraine must make itself in the course of negotiations. It just crystallizes the sheer scale of that Russian demand and why it remains such a fundamental, maybe even insurmountable hurdle right now.
So, okay, let's try and bring this all together for you, the listener. What we've essentially seen is this flurry of intense peace diplomacy, but it's all happening against this backdrop of a very active and in some ways escalating conflict on the ground.
Absolutely. It really underscores that even with this stated desire for peace coming from, well, many of the players involved, these huge divides remain, and they're not minor points. We're talking about fundamental disagreements on territory, on security, and maybe even on the basic commitment to finding a peaceful resolution from all sides.
So here's something to think about. You've got these contrasting views on a ceasefire, completely different interpretations of what negotiations even means, and ongoing military action. What does all this suggest about the real path to peace? Or maybe, what does it tell us about the real obstacles standing in the way of lasting peace in the region? How do you weigh the intentions here? Looking at what they say versus what they do. Lots to consider. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.